So this is John Costa, the founder of the Conflict Memory Education Centre, based here in Leicester. And what we always try and do is catch up with old friends and projects that have been going on for a while to see where they're at. And one of the ones that I particularly like is the SS Tilawa project from 1942. Really exciting. I remember when that first started and talking to Emile, and Emile's here, and his father, about the project. And I think we've done it a couple of times. This is probably like our third or fourth interview just to see how things are going and how things are progressing. And so I'm particularly excited to talk to you today. So welcome. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me.
Oh, thanks, John, for this. What I would describe as like our annual highlight, our annual reunion, a summary of all of the things that have happened in the previous year. And we're so appreciative to have someone, especially in Leicester, where there is a Tilawa connection, to continue to be a champion of the work that we've done. So it's very, very gracious of you, and we appreciate your help.
No problem at all. Well, for me, like I said, it's quite a unique story, I think, and certainly with the approach that I have with conflict memory, sometimes it's not about, we know when it started, when it ended, we know who was involved, we kind of know big events and how many people died and stuff like that. Well, yes, but also it's not just about the fighting, the war fighting. It's about, for me, the conflict memory is about what else happened, particularly civilian related, and the impact that those kind of incidents had on families down the sort of intergenerations as well. And your story is an amazing one because it fits, because it's like grandparents, it's then a generation that's starting to die out, but and also it's a bit of a hidden history, a bit of a hidden tragedy when it comes to the conflict. So just give us, for people that are watching this for the first time, and inspire us to go back and watch some of the other interviews and stuff. Just give us a snapshot of what the project is, and I'm really interested to see what the latest developments are.
Sure, yes. So the story has become described as the Indian Ocean's Titanic. And in the middle of the Second World War, so this is 3 years before the end of the war, 5 years before the end of British rule in India, there were merchant cargo passenger liners such as the SS Tilawa. It was, owned by the British Steam Navigation Company, and they were used to transfer goods and cargo and passengers, in this case from India to Africa. And so the SS Tilawa left for the final time from Bombay, 23rd of November 1942. It was carrying 732 passengers, four gunners, 222 crew. It was going to make stops to Mombasa, Maputo, and Durban. And 2 days into its voyage, in the early hours of the morning of the 23rd, it was twice torpedoed by the Japanese, by the Imperial Navy. It was the I-29 Matsu submarine. And sadly, 280 people died, which included my great grandfather. 678 people were rescued by HMS Birmingham and SS Carthage. Um, and, we found out about this story 20 years ago, and there was nothing really on the internet that was comprehensive. And so my father and I started on a personal father son research project to figure out, after our grandfather first broke the story to us, who is our real great grandfather, what is our heritage and our roots, and, you know, trying to figure out, why did this ship sink? And that grew into a organically into this voluntary service to the Commonwealth, where now we've been able to set up a Tilawa 1942 global family support group. We've organized national commemorations. We've built quite a comprehensive website, and I'm just so happy to tell you uh, the things that we've been working on in the past 12 months, and what we've discovered, learned, and what we're working on for this year. But it's what we call the forgotten tragedy of the Indian people, because during the Second World War, we think about Pearl Harbor, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Hitler, Churchill, the Blitz. We think about the war in the sky and the war on the land. But perhaps what about the war and that period of time for everyday people in the Indian Ocean, and in this case, the Indian diaspora?
Yeah, I think this is for me has always been the interesting thing about the story, is the fact that such a tragedy that size, and the impact on how it ripples through history with people is forgotten completely. As a footnote, not even a footnote in the story, because it's so big. You know what I mean? For the World War Two, for sort of 5 or 6 years, it dominated everything globally, much more than World War One did to an extent. We very much think about World War One as being the trenches and things going on in other people's empire areas, and affected, the amount of colonial troops. Even now, we still don't necessarily know how many colonial troops on all sides fought for the people, the main sort of countries that were involved, and why they were fighting to try and help there with independence. And then 20 years later, World War Two comes along, and again, it's the contribution from South Asia to sort of the Western war effort. It is almost forgotten, but also incredibly massive and significant, and affects Leicester, where we live, and our own family stories from both of our sides, massively. And so, therefore, it's really important if you can find something like this. It's not about finding more stories like this. It's about this story being told in the right way. Just allows other people to think about World War Two in a very kind of slightly different way. It's not just about war fighting and soldiers and all those things that we think about, but sort of the impact on those left behind the home front, but also generations finding out. My name's John William Ernest James Coster, so John and William both killed in the war. Ernest and James were my step granddads. So that's an impact on my family. And what we've got here, as you say, with your grandfather and great grandfather's memories, is how do we tell that story now in a way that's not just a turn off for people because it's historical, but how do we keep it contemporary and modern? And that's really where I guess things like, what was it carrying? Why was it torpedoed? Are one of those things that the who done it that you can untangle and unravel just gives you an opportunity to tell that story in that way. And if it leads through to a film or a book or a documentary, they're just things. What it does ultimately, it's keeping memory alive. Now, you said you obviously feel the weight of that because it's gone from let's find out about what happened to our relative through to suddenly becoming not only the custodians of the story or a certain way that it's told, but also other people then look to you as a connector. Do you find that each anniversary that goes past that's really kind of moved on, from Mumbai to South Africa through to London, through to Leicester? Do you suddenly think it's like moving all the time? It's like it's beyond you. It's something that's pulling you forward rather than something you're driving now.
It definitely feels that way. Um, what I thought was a personal story to now maybe, Leicester, oh, London, oh, England, oh, India, oh, South Africa, oh, Uganda, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Canada, the US. It's somebody was kind of, being funny not too long ago and just saying, "Oh, hey, here's Mr. Tilawa," and for this isn't about me. This isn't about one guy trying to do it all. This is about somebody taking initiative to do something that has to be done and to bring people together and to give them the opportunity to share their story, their connection. For some people, It is celebrating the life of their family because perhaps because they were survivors. For others, it is to help them memorialize and remember their loved ones who died. For others, it is helping them to learn a little bit more of a story that they potentially heard about or they never heard about. But regardless, to take, a random hearsay or story from the past, and now it is growing into a permanent part of history, that's very, very cool. And when we talk about some of the developments that have taken place both in 2025 and what we're working on for 2026, it John, this is a powerful reminder that, look, there are loads of stories out there. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a connection to the past. Lots of people have died. There are lots of tragedies. But the difference maker is always going to be, okay, who wants to put in the time and who wants to put in the effort? It is certainly a labor of love. There is personal cost there too. Something else has to take a back seat on a given day, in a given month, in a given year for a history project to move forward. And I don't know at this juncture when it's going to end. We don't do commemorations, for example, for the sake of it. We do them when there is a very special reason. And, this year will be one of them, as
Mm.
was last year.
Yeah, I think it's adding layers of interest from people as well. I mean, so for example, like your one that was at Greenwich at the National Maritime Museum kind of anchors it very much as a naval event. It allows you to then marry that with there were military vessels involved as well, but sort of there was no such thing as a civilian vessel really. Every vessel was used for military purposes or transporting things, you know what I mean, whether that was guns, ammunition, or gold or different materials for certain reasons, so therefore was it a legitimate target for the Japanese? Was it something they just came across and they were bored on that morning? So these are all things that different places where you go allow you to make connections for people who turn around and go, I know a little bit about that story, but I've never told anybody. Well, that's actual intelligence. You can only tell the story of artificial intelligence on the internet if people upload those stories. So until you find them, it's actual intelligence that can add. And it's not about the answer, it's just about a little piece of the jigsaw in the puzzle that means we're getting a little bit closer as to why. So what does happen at a big event? Say, for example, let's talk about the Greenwich one, rather than specifics, but let's talk about, generally the one in Greenwich. How much does that allow you as a project to move forward? What does it add that allows you to then build on another year where you think, wow, that was a great event, but also it was quite significant? Does it add credibility? Does it add motivation for people to come forward because they now think, well, actually, you're dealing with the National Maritime Museum. You must be serious about what you do. How does that impact someone like yourself and your father doing this event?
Credibility is everything, because you don't want to come across as a fanatic, but it takes a certain level of passion, enthusiasm, energy, intensity to drive things along. Some people, they just want to do one thing at a time. But someone like myself, I want to have several plates spinning because I don't know which one is going to gain traction sooner. So, thinking of your question, Greenwich was incredible because it allowed us for the first time to deal with an official institution. It allowed us to deal with a respected institution that specialized in maritime history. And how interesting that something that someone says or does, or the timing, the context of, in this case, the museum, it can lead to other doors opening, or just get your mind thinking about other possibilities. So, for example, Dr. Erin Jaffa is the curator at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. And he had mentioned in his presentation during the 81st commemoration on the 23rd of November 2023, or yeah, 2023, that the museum is interested in objects, and a photograph can be considered an object. And at that time, he had only found maybe one or two photos of the Tilawa, and there was nothing else. At that point, the silver salvage Supreme Court case was, kind of happening. And we wouldn't know the verdict of that until May of 2024. So, that would be, 6, 7 months after the Greenwich commemoration. And we always wondered, we said this in Greenwich, will we learn anything more of Tilawa and the wreck that would form part of objects? There was then knowledge of Narendra Modi supporting the largest national maritime museum in the world in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, India. And when you have the support of the retired Vice Admiral I.C. Rao, who's the founder of the Mumbai Maritime Museum Society, when you now have people like, Paddy Rogers and Helen Mears and Dr. Erin Jaffa at the National Maritime Museum, that now sets a basis for other people to want to have a conversation with you too, because there are so many industries that we never even thought of that have a connection to Tilawa. So we could talk about maritime archaeology, Tilawa. We could talk about maritime salvage law, Tilawa. We could talk about Second World War maritime stories, Tilawa. We could talk about Indian diaspora in the 40s, Tilawa. And so it goes on and on and on. And the National Maritime Museum in India, when they eventually set up in the next year or two, in their merchant gallery, they want the SS Tilawa to be one of the key stories representing the Indian diaspora from, Africa was considered the new world for Indians back during the days of Imperial Britain. So things like that.
Yeah, it allows you to tie all of these various strands of history together into these little stories in these little knots, and then things kind of coalesce around them. Like you said, sometimes you need academia, you need, politicians, you need media in order to raise your story, and then it allows other people. Sometimes it gives people permission to come forward, and if I share my story with you, or if I give you my object, then I know that you're serious about it. I think it's really good, and I think from the point of view of the survivors. So you've got people that you're able to for this project you've been able to interview or have been able to showcase and invite them to various celebrations that you've had who are now no longer here. So it's their voice has been heard and valued and added to that story, and also then the impact on the family, isn't it? Because they know that story's been told and their loved one might not be here, but it's something that has shaped their family. Whether you know it or not, these things all shape families, and it's a different way of looking about the world. How have people come to you to report and cover the project? Have people come to you to say, look, I want to write a book about the project, or I'm writing a book, can you add to it? Have you got any research that I can use? Has it kind of stimulated those kind of conversations, not just related to the story, but how the story's told and then how it fits into narratives that people have been told, for example?
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, we have people that will hear, a podcast like this or a radio interview or we'll see a news article or something on the news, TV, and then reach out to us. Other times it's through our own research that we make connections with people. We were approached, for example, by the team at Magellan Limited. They were going to go back to Tilawa. They were going to go back to visit the reg. And that was special. And this took place in February of 2025. So they would be going out middle of the Indian Ocean, 930 miles northeast of the Seychelles, 4,200 meters deep. That's over 2 miles. That's crazy. And we had worked with them to arrange a live streamed recording where, firstly, I would be in modern times the first Tilawa family member with my father to see the reg. That was intense. That was crazy. That was a heart pounding moment of seeing the grave site, as it were, of my great grandfather, to see the surface of the waters where our loved ones were floating around for 2 days. We were able to lower the plaque, a permanent plaque, with one of the silver minted coins, remembering the 280 lost lives, and have that fastened onto the wreck. And to see the condition of the wreck, to be able to identify things like, you know, evidence of that there were gunners. Why was Tilawa a military threat potentially? And that was really the beginning of 2025. Think about another gentleman, Barry Holmes, who is part of a development team that are restoring the Hebburn shipyard, Newcastle, you know, area. They are actually, as we do this podcast now, they've started construction of this area to restore shipbuilding history and to rejuvenate, the local economy there, and to try and do something good for the people there. Part of that is a future micro museum which will feature celebrating the history of two ships. SS Tilawa is one of them because it was built there, and the other one is Lord Mountbatten's ship HMS Kelly. So, you somebody reaches out, they want to include you. They want you to contribute to the research, to share the work that we've done. And what's lovely about that is it then provides the potential for a permanent place, because it's lovely to do commemorations, it's lovely to do exhibits, we will continue to do them, but we've also always wanted a permanent place where appropriate, for because real estate, you know, is a big issue. The National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, there's only so much space that they have. And there are so many stories to share. Though I will say that in the Indian Gallery, the Indian Ocean Gallery of the Greenwich Museum, it was a bit of a dinky little glass enclosure with a picture of Gandhi and the East India Company. And there wasn't really any strong Indian maritime connection there. So, I do continue to knock on the door. But yeah, just while my memory is kind of sharp here, just to share, what was 2025 all about. So, seeing the wreck for the first time, working with Seabank Digital Ocean Liner Designs, Michael Brady and his team, to recreate the Tilawa accurately, to actually have a high museum digital product, this ship, where we can now see its various features, the way that we knew it to be in 1924 when Lady Elsie Mackay, launched it in Hebburn, Newcastle, all those years ago. We actually launched the Tilawa music soundtrack, which was the lyrics were actually written by Munara Sakat. His grandfather was one of the passengers on the Tilawa. His name was Muhammad Ali Patel. We had the commemoration in Leicester, which was the 83rd anniversary. This was incredible commemorative event at the People Centre in Leicester. 320 people sitting there in person, and over 1,000 people streaming online. And for the first time, we would be able to have new guests and hear new stories. So, for instance, we had Her Excellency Namisha Madwani, who is the Ugandan High Commissioner to the UK. Her mother, grandmother, and aunts were survivors. We had just learnt not long before that Leicester commemoration, that there was a new survivor. And it's interesting, going back to your question of, people coming forward and wanting to share their stories. So think about this. In 2022, for the Mumbai first commemoration, we have a gentleman in New Delhi saying, reaches out to us and says, "My grandfather died on the Tilawa. He was the founder of the Sikh Gurudwara, the first one in Mombasa, Kenya." Well, that now opens up to him introducing his family in Britain and in Canada and in the US. And what does his cousin in Canada tell me? Huh, she's found another family in the province of British Columbia, and that other family have the blanket that HMS Birmingham crew gave to their father, who was a survivor. This same family also connect us with a well-known Ugandan hockey Olympian from the 70s, Malkit Son, in London, whose father was a survivor, and he still has the turban and the bracelet and other things that he was wearing during that Tilawa incident. Um, and and then the cousins that I'm referring to in Canada, they're telling me that they used to be students in Uganda themselves going to a high school in Kampala, and who was their history teacher? Oh, their history teacher is the well-known BK Amin. I go onto Facebook and I put this out onto some of the Asian Ugandan groups. Does anybody here know a history teacher in secondary school back in the day, Mr. BK Amin? A flood of messages.
Mm.
Mr. BK Amin used to be so afraid and go into a bit of a panic attack when it would rain, there'd be thunderstorms, and get everybody under the table and close the shutters. And these kids were making fun of him, not knowing at the time about the Tilawa, or that their own grandfather lost his life on the very same ship as their history teacher. Anyhow, Mr. BK Amin and his wife no longer with us, but his daughter, now age 88, who was living in London for many years and is now in Gujarat, India, Mrs. Saroji Ben Patel, was around 6 at the time. And we've now been able to document, her experience. We had, this is crazy, talk about research. Sometimes you go on the internet, and if you just put in SS Tilawa, there's only so much that's going to come up. You have to be tactical and strategic. And we saw this story of a journalist, Mr. Hugh Milner, and he was a deck officer on some ship that was torpedoed in the Indian Ocean in 1942. Blah blah blah. Well, I then take one news clipping to another clipping to this obituary, Next thing I know, this South African, because you see, our passenger list is incomplete. And especially when it comes to the non-Asian people, the crew that were on the ship, we don't have many of those names at all. So Hugh Milner has a couple of daughters still alive, must be in their 70s, 80s, in Colorado, USA. So now we're trying to strengthen connections to the US, which is a new thing. And after Mr. Milner died years ago, his friend had given a painting to his daughters, as a gift of this, their father, who was quite an elderly gentleman at this point. And there are some squiggly lines behind his head on the wall of this painting. And that's the first time that his children in their 60s, 70s are learning about this Tilawa story. It was all written there. I mean, that's nuts. You will not believe, John, that the Right Honourable Mr. John Harvey, who was the UK Member of Parliament, Conservative MP for Walthamstow East, London, he was of the Merchant Navy officer on the Tilawa. When he passed away, here is a Member of Parliament who was a survivor of the Tilawa. There was another gentleman who ended up, retiring. He became the Royal Canadian Navy Lieutenant Commander, and his name was Donald Thexton, and he was a navigator during those days, and he was a survivor of the Tilawa. So there's a Canadian connection. So and now we're connected to the Seafarers Association and Lord West, and we're trying to get connected with the National Merchant Navy Association in Britain. I was just invited at the International Shipwreck Conference at the University of Plymouth to share Tilawa for the first time in another educated institution, but predominantly to a non-Asian audience, which was a big deal. We've got a Lego type creation going on right now with the Tilawa. We're doing 3D printing on recreating the Tilawa. We're trying to recreate the wreck. The silver has now been minted by the UK Royal Mint with His Majesty the King's face on it and a Tilawa stamp. The same in the Kruger Ran. I mean, there's just so much that took place in 2025. I have been commissioned, to answer your question, to write a book, and we hope that we can launch it during the year of 2027, which will be the 85th anniversary. So it's good that we didn't rush into that. A lot of people were like, "You got to get the book out. You got to get the book out." But my whole thing is no. Let's see the wreck first. Let's get more stories. Let's have a few more commemorative events. And you will not believe that now, this year, 2026, the 84th anniversary is going to be held at Speaker's House, Westminster Palace, London, England. I mean, to be in Parliament. And John, you will appreciate, because of your background, you're probably well aware of the Armed Forces Bill 2026 that's being worked on right now. And somebody would think, well, Emile, why would you be interested in that? Well, the 1986 Military Remains Act is being amended. And what we're trying to do is raise awareness that the Tilawa should be treated as a protected war grave, as a heritage site, because of its role during the war. Now, there is resistance to that. And there was, for your listeners, a very interesting Court of Appeals case that the Secretary of State, the Ministry of Defense, lost about 20 years ago. It's based on the story of the SS Storer. And the SS Storer was a troop ship. And because it had contributed to the war effort, even though it was a passenger vessel, it became protected. And so we've been doing research now on how can we prove, how can we demonstrate Tilawa's track record during the Second World War? And can we use what I have described as the Tilawa principle as a model, as an example for, in this case, protecting wrecks that are not military wrecks and are in international waters? Because you see, Britain is not a member of UNESCO heritage. Britain focuses on wrecks within 12 nautical miles. Britain is only interested in international sea protection if it's a military vessel. But for something like Tilawa, they're like, oh no, we don't have jurisdiction and there's nothing we can do and we can't enforce and we can't do this, we can't do that. So, that's just a little flavor and taste of what's been going on 2025, 2026. And the other thing that comes to my mind is that when after the UK Supreme Court case was done and footage and photos were released of the wreck, that was quite sad because, in one sense, the silver represents, precious metals representing precious lives. Obviously, some people feel hurt that you've got industries out there profiteering with commodities connected to a forgotten tragedy. Others are grateful that as a result of trying to get the silver, which is the property of the South African government, that there is now a bit more closure. And what was just a story is now even more real. And it's that much more powerful and it's that much more important. And there's that much more motivation for various industries, associations, organizations to get Tilawa prominently featured in the history books. But it was sad to see the manner in which Deep Ocean Search, the company hired to perform the salvage, and it's on their website. They've documented it well. They've even admitted that at the time they were running out of money, resources, time, pressure, stress. They essentially had to butcher sections of the wreck and break through the decks to get into the opium rooms. And so that, there was a lack of respect in our view of the way that the wreck was treated and handled. And so again, we can use Tilawa as an example. And every time Tilawa is mentioned as a point of reference, the story stays alive. So you think about that first conversation that we had when Dad and I were planning the first commemoration in Mumbai, India, 80th anniversary, 2022. And now here we are, how many commemorations is that? 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. So we've got, the fifth commemoration this year in an ancient, iconic place where we can now share with parliamentarians this story. And I've got to tell you this crazy story. Thinking of all the Leicester connections. John, you won't believe this. So we're in the People Centre and we have some volunteers. And one of these volunteers comes to me, and it just so happens that she is like a cousin to my aunt. So my mum's brother, his wife, my aunt. So my mum's brother, his wife, my aunt. So they're talking about this commemoration in Leicester at the People Centre. And this volunteer goes back and talks to her side of the family. John, you will not believe it. I mean, I wish I knew. I wish I knew just before the Leicester commemoration. But this volunteer's great grandmother, which would also be the great grandmother of my aunt, my uncle's wife, my mother's sister in law, her great grandmother lost her life with her several of her children, three or four children, on the SS Tilawa. I mean, come on. I mean, my own uncle, you know, um, we're tight. We're tight family. We're tight. He's my mum's brother. And all these years, they didn't know. And we found their name, her great grandmother's name, on the passenger list. And so we're going to be able to feature their story and share at Parliament their story. And we're also going to be able to pay tribute to Don Thexton and John Harvey and Hugh Milner. And of course, we should not forget E.B. Duncan. E.B. Duncan was the first radio officer, wasn't he, who sacrificed his life and went down with the ship and was sending those distress calls until the final moments. The captain, apparently, according to several witnesses over a period of time, did a runner. But E.B. Duncan did receive a King George V King's Bravery posthumous award in the 40s. But, it's because of his efforts that at least 678 people passed away. So, there's a bit of a monologue, John, but it just gives you and your listeners a bit of meat to the bone that it's not like we're twiddling our thumbs trying to find something out of the air that's of interest. There's just a lot going on here.
I think that that's brilliant. Thank you for that, because that's a really good, quite concise but detailed way of sort of updating us since our last interview. But I think it's also the fact that you're not trying to find connections; connections are finding you. And I think for me, that's what makes the story so interesting, is that it's relevant to all of those areas that you detailed at the beginning, marine salvage and that. But to go back 5 years when you first started this journey with your father, how many wrecks had been lost? How many stories would never be told now because that's gone? So 5 years on, has what you've been doing, what you've been documenting, what you've been going through with salvage companies and governments and lawyers and legal, national maritime museums, helped the next project that pops out in someone's life next month, where suddenly they start going on this journey? What have you done that's helped them to be able to tell this story? And I think for me, that's the key thing, really, is the fact that it's not what have you done, it's the fact that you're doing it. And what will you do? What's your aims and aspirations? How long will it last? Well, why do we have to give it uh, any kind of meaning other than the fact that if it's moving, then people are talking about it. One final question I want to ask you, and thank you for your time today, is what kind of approach are you taking with the book that you've been commissioned to write? Is it sort of the authoritative uh, story of the day, or is it more about since? What are you trying to do? Because again, like any documentary, when I always talk to a documentary filmmaker, I always say, when did you decide to stop? So with the book, do you think it's telling the story up until this point and then seeing what happens after that? What kind of approach are you taking with it?
It's a very good question, and I just wanted to chime in on something else that you said, which was very powerful just now, because there have been one or two that have, given me flack for, why are you doing this? What's the big deal? Blah blah blah. But you really hit a nerve. We do what we do out of love. We do what we do because we care. We do what we do because we want to make a difference. We want to help. And in this case, John, sincerely, I also want Tilawa to be an example of how one can go about raising awareness to another tragedy, another story. Don't give up. Just keep going. Keep the fire alive. And think of creative initiatives like a website, like news articles, and so on and so forth, to build over time. Because if you look hard enough with persistence and patience, there is always going to be more information that was buried, hidden, forgotten, that just needs to be taken out. Now, as far as the book is concerned, look, there have been so many opinions on how should the book be written, what should be in the book, the purpose, the direction of it. We don't have a publication that provides a comprehensive overview of the SS Tilawa. We don't have a book that gives the audience a comprehensive bird's eye view of all of those different layers. And we want a publication that is of interest to those various industries. So we will feature many stories. And the book gives an opportunity, a voice to the people that lost their lives and those that also survived, and the victims, the families that were left behind and lost their loved ones, and it completely destroyed their lives in so many different ways, like my grandfather's. But it's also an opportunity to talk about all of the other things that I have mentioned. So when the book comes out, it's going to give you a history of the ship. It's going to explain what was going on during the time of Tilawa's sinking. It's going to talk about how the wreck was found, discovered, what happened to the silver, the court case. It's going to take us through our personal story, how we started organizing these various commemorations, developments that took place year by year. Of course, the family stories as well. And so, you know, in 2027, if we can hopefully release it by then, you'll have a book released after 85 years, but in the 20th year of this father son journey, 20 years of research, 20 years of effort, um, from nothing to everything, as it were. And we must also, I do need to emphasize, John, that if it wasn't for that salvage, if it wasn't for discovering the wreck, if it wasn't for this Supreme Court case and that first article in the Daily Mail in the beginning of 2020, the last 5, 6 years pretty much wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. We probably would never have had commemorative events. We wouldn't know what the wreck looks like. There's just so many things that have happened in the last 5 years compared to the first 15 years. And so this book will look to tie all of that together.
Yeah, brilliant. It's great, isn't it? It's just nice to know then, because I think I'll give you a simple analogy. Yeah, people say to me, John, describe your Saturday Heritage Fair. Okay, and I say it's for people that are interested in heritage and history, any kind of form. Um, and it's for organisations or individuals that are at the beginning of a heritage journey. We want to tell this story. We've got this stuff. I'm the custodian of something in my family or in our community. And others that are at various stages of their journey. They're 5 years old, they've done their first lottery project. They then thinking about, well, what do I do next? There's others that have been going for 20 years that now help other people. And I just say, it's just go and talk to people and just say to them, this is where I am at my journey. What could you do to help me? And it's not about what they do, it's about what they can share. And I just think for me, the great thing about this story is that, having known you and your father like I do, it's there's a personal reason to tell these stories, and then it gets to the point where suddenly your story connects and resonates with other people's stories that gives them permission. And then you find these connections with, like, cousins and on your family, that actually you're connected to this tragedy but you didn't know, and here you are, all these years later. And so I think it's not about just what the story is about, people, places, and events. It's the fact that there's so many of these that impact and shape the world that what we live in. But if you leave World War II to the narrative of D-Day and Arnhem and personalities and big events. The day-to-day minutiae of what it was like for that period of time. I always say, imagine what World War II would have been like with social media. Well, that's what you've got with Ukraine at the moment. You've got this kind of documentation of it. And if you're dealing with Bosnia 30 years ago, well, that's going to be Ukraine in 30 years' time with those kind of memorial things. They're still struggling now with all the technology that we've got. And here we are, we've had to wait till the technology is there, not only for us to be able to see the ship, with the technology to do that, but then also the fact that because we now know what the cargo was and the UK Supreme Court, the silver makes it a tantalizing story for people to tell. And we have to almost play with the devil and roll with those stories in order to ensure that the people that died and those that survived story is told, because we've almost got to ride off the back that people are interested because there was silver on it. So for me, I
It
think
is so
it's very
perfectly
it's very
said.
brave. It's very brave to do the story at all, because there'll always be those that will detract you. Sometimes because they've not told the story, but or they feel they could do it better. But there's always someone like that.
Yeah.
There's always someone like that. So no, like I said, I'm impressed, and thank you for taking the time to speak to me. And like I said, all power to you, Elbow. All eyes on November and marking it again, and seeing what comes from there.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope to actually get to meet you in person one day and have a hug.
Absolutely. Team hug. That's it. Team Tilawa hug.
All right.
Thanks very
Thanks.
much, Emil. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.